Welcome back to Speducation. I am your host, Brandon Reed, and this is a new week, so we have a new lesson. So, what are we going to be learning about this week? Well, let's dive in and find out. Today's lesson, timelines. Now, we've talked about timelines in the past, and we kind of talked about it just in passing because early on this channel, when we were talking about the different parts of special education, timelines came up. But today, we're going to be specifically talking about timelines related to annual case conferences, and we might also look into progress monitoring as well. Now, when we're talking about special education timelines, we're talking about the Special Education Services Timeline. Now, this is kind of an overview. So when a parent is provided a referral for special ed services, the school has 25 school days to get the consent to evaluate. Then the school has 35 school days to complete the initial evaluation report, where they collect data, do testing to determine whether the student qualifies for special ed services. Once they have completed that, then they present that report to the parent. If the parent doesn't agree with the report, or if they decide that they just don't need special ed services, then the timeline ends. However, if the timeline continues and the parent does agree, then the school has 30 days to complete the meeting and to start services. Now, once the services start, there's something called progress reports or progress monitoring. Those progress monitoring reports are done over the IEP goals, and those are typically sent out once every 9 weeks. Now, it depends on the goal itself, because some goals might be written where a progress report needs to be sent home once every 4 weeks, but it depends on the goal. Then you have the annual review, which means that the special ed teacher, the administration, and the parent will meet once a year to discuss the IEP. And then every 3 years, there's a reevaluation conference where you basically sit down, you review all of the information, all of the data in the IEP to determine whether a reevaluation for the student is necessary. Now, this was just an overview of the special ed service timeline, but how does that relate to other states? Because each state is different than the other, because each state is unique. For instance, in Indiana, children are evaluated within 50 instructional days of parental consent, 20 days if the student has participated in response to intervention or RTI, or when expedited evaluation is required by discipline procedures identified in 511 Indiana Administrative Code. Now, in Florida, the rule states that the student is evaluated within a period of 60 days. This includes school days in which the student is in attendance. Now, in New York, evaluations will be completed within 20 school days of the day you sign the consent for evaluation. Now, the meeting will be held within 60 calendar days of the date that you sign the consent for evaluation. But in Washington State, the district has 35 days to complete the initial evaluation process from the time written parental consent to evaluate is obtained. If the district needs to complete an initial evaluation due to a request made by following disciplinary action, then that initial evaluation timeline must be expedited. So as you can see, each state has special education timelines that are slightly different. However, there is one timeline that is universal. That is the annual case conference. The annual case conference, or annual case review, depending on who you ask, must be held no later than 1 year from the previous IEP date. However, the annual case conference can take place anytime before the next annual case conference date within that calendar year. This means that after holding an annual case conference, you could potentially hold another annual case conference 4 weeks or even 2 days after you originally held it. However, that doesn't make much sense, because if you've already updated the IEP, why would you need to do it again? And in that case, if you need to update just parts of the IEP and not the whole thing, then you would have a revision conference, which would mean that you wouldn't have to change the anniversary date. A revision would just update the IEP from that point on. So the next annual case conference would still be a year out, but you wouldn't have to change the date if you had a revision conference. The only thing that you would have to change in that regard is the service dates. Now, if you're curious about your state's special education timelines, what can you do? Well, all you have to do is go to Google and then type in your state and then the words special education timelines. That'll give you all the information that you need. So for instance, if I wanted to look up Illinois special education timelines, I type it in the search bar and it would pop up. So once the evaluation is complete, then you must hold the IEP within 60 days after getting your consent. So that's the special education timeline for Illinois. But what if I want to know about Nevada? Then you simply type in Nevada and then it brings it up. Generally, Nevada schools have 45 school days after you give your informed written consent to finish the evaluation. Now, let's say I live in Michigan. So I would type in Michigan. And it says right here, within 30 school days counted from the date the district receives the parental consent to evaluate to the offer of FAPE, or free and appropriate public education. So now hopefully you feel a little bit more confident about the special ed timelines in regards to annual case conferences. But if you have any other questions about special ed timelines, please feel free to post those in the comments section, and I'll be more than happy to answer that. Well, that brings us to the end of this lesson. Now you're probably wondering, what are we going to be learning about next week? Next week, we're going to be learning about manifest determination hearings and what they are. Now, if you liked what you saw, please click the like button. And if you want updates on future videos, feel free to click the subscribe button and ring the bell for updates on future videos. And as always, if you have comments or questions, or you have a topic that you would like me to cover, please feel free to leave that in the comments section so that I can do a video on it at a later date. And if you know somebody that might benefit from this channel, please feel free to share this with them. Because again, the more people know, the more informed they are, the more invested parents are in their child's education. And until next time, class dismissed.